He was the heir to an empire worth billions. Born without sight, he had never uttered a single word in his 3 years of life. Countless specialists had tried and failed. 3 years of complete silence. His father had almost given up hope, until a poor little girl with dusty bare feet and muddy hands walked into their world. What happened next left everyone speechless. No expensive treatments. No cutting-edge technology. Just gentle touch, endless patience, and something no highly paid expert had ever thought to try. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that like button. And please drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. The enormous glass doors of the villa estate gleamed like diamonds under the morning sun. Inside the mansion, silence wrapped around every corner like a heavy blanket. This wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet you'd find in a library or a sleeping baby's room. This was the suffocating silence of sadness, the kind that made even the servants walk on their tiptoes and speak in whispers. In the eastern wing of the mansion, past hallways decorated with paintings worth more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes, there was a special room. The walls were painted soft cream, and expensive medical equipment lined every surface. Monitors beeped quietly. Special therapy tools sat unused on shelves. This room had cost more to build than entire hospitals, yet the small boy who lived here remained unreachable. His name was Ethan Villa and he was 3 years old. He sat on a cushioned mat in the center of the room, his tiny hands resting in his lap. His eyes, though perfectly shaped and beautiful, saw nothing. They were the color of warm honey, but they stared at a world that existed only in darkness for him. His dark hair fell across his forehead, and his small body was dressed in the finest clothes money could buy. But none of that mattered, because Ethan had never seen his own reflection. He had never spoken his father's name. He lived in a prison of silence and darkness that no amount of money could unlock. Robert Villa, Ethan's father, stood outside the room watching through the observation window. He was 42 years old, with gray streaks beginning to appear in his black hair, gray that hadn't been there 3 years ago before Ethan was born. Robert was one of the wealthiest men in the country. He owned technology companies, real estate across 5 states, and had business connections that reached around the world. He could buy almost anything. Almost. But he couldn't buy his son's voice. He couldn't purchase Ethan's sight. And that truth was slowly breaking him apart from the inside. "Mr. Villa, the new specialist from Switzerland has arrived," said Margaret, the head nurse. She was a kind woman in her 50s who had been with the family since Ethan was born. Her voice was always gentle, always hopeful, even though both she and Robert knew the truth. 27 specialists had come through these doors. 27 had left with apologies and empty promises. Robert nodded without taking his eyes off his son. "Send him in." Dr. Heinrich Muller entered the observation room moments later. He was a tall man with wire-rimmed glasses and a reputation that preceded him. He had supposedly worked miracles with children who had similar conditions. Robert had paid $250,000 just to get him here for 1 week. "Mr. Villa, I've reviewed all of Ethan's medical files," Dr. Muller said in his thick accent. "His condition is most unusual. The blindness, there is no physical damage to his eyes. His vocal cords are perfectly formed. Yet he does not see. He does not speak. He barely responds to external stimuli." "I know all of this," Robert said quietly, his jaw tight. "I've heard it from 27 doctors before you. Can you help him or not?" Dr. Muller adjusted his glasses. "I would like to try my therapeutic approach. It has shown success in similar cases in Europe. But I must be honest with you, Mr. Villa. Your son's case is more severe than any I have encountered. The fact that he shows no response to sound, to touch, to temperature changes, it is as if he has chosen to disconnect from the world entirely." "He's 3 years old," Robert said, his voice cracking slightly. "He didn't choose anything. Something is wrong and I need you to fix it." Inside the therapy room, Ethan remained motionless. A toy had been placed in front of him, a colorful ball that played music when squeezed. He didn't reach for it. He didn't turn his head toward the sound. He simply existed in his own dark, silent universe, unreachable. Dr. Muller spent the next hour with Ethan, trying various techniques. He used special textured objects meant to stimulate touch response. He played different frequencies of sound through headphones. He even tried temperature therapy using warm and cool compresses. Ethan's response to everything was the same: nothing. No reaction. No recognition that anything was happening at all. When Dr. Muller finally emerged from the room, Robert saw the answer on his face before the doctor spoke a word. "I am very sorry, Mr. Villa. I do not believe I can help your son with the methods I know. There is something deeper happening here that I cannot reach. He has built walls that I do not know how to climb. Robert felt something inside him crumble. He had held on to hope for so long, through so many disappointments. But hearing it again, seeing another expert admit defeat, it was too much. "Get out," Robert whispered. "Mr. Villa, I truly wish." "Get out." Robert's voice exploded through the hallway. "Get out of my house. Send me your bill and leave." Dr. Muller left quietly. Margaret touched Robert's shoulder gently, but he pulled away. He walked to his office and locked the door, something he had been doing more and more lately. Inside, surrounded by awards and photos of business triumphs that meant nothing anymore, Robert Villa put his head in his hands and felt the weight of helplessness crushing him. Outside the mansion, beyond the tall iron gates and manicured lawns, life continued in a very different world. 3 miles down the road was a neighborhood where the houses were small and the paint was peeling. This was where people worked 2 jobs to pay rent, where children played in streets instead of private playgrounds, where a fancy dinner meant pizza on Friday night. In one of these small houses lived a little girl named Penny. She was 4 years old, with wild curly brown hair that her mother tried to tame every morning with limited success. Her clothes were clean but worn, handed down from her older cousin. Her shoes had holes in them that her mother kept meaning to fix but never found the time. Penny's father had left when she was a baby, and her mother, Carol, worked as a housekeeper for wealthy families to make ends meet. But despite having so little, Penny had something special. She had curiosity that could not be contained. She had a way of seeing beauty in everything, in the weeds growing through sidewalk cracks, in the patterns rainwater made on windows, in the texture of tree bark and smooth river stones. While other children watched television, Penny collected treasures, interesting leaves, pretty rocks, feathers dropped by birds. Her pockets were always full of nature's small wonders. "Penny, stop playing in that mud and come eat your breakfast," Carol called from their tiny kitchen. She was getting ready for work, pulling her hair back and checking her watch. She cleaned houses for 3 different families, and today she was scheduled at the Villa estate. Penny looked up from the small patch of dirt beside their house where she had been making mud pies. Her hands were covered in rich, dark soil, and she had somehow gotten it on her cheek too. She grinned, showing the gap where she had recently lost her first tooth. "But Mama, look, I made a family of mud cookies. This one is the mama and these little ones are the babies and Penny Marie right now. We can't be late." Penny sighed but obeyed, running inside to wash her hands. The water from their faucet was cold. The water heater had broken last month and they couldn't afford to fix it yet, but Penny didn't complain. She scrubbed her hands clean, watching the mud swirl down the drain like chocolate milk. "Mama, why do you have to work at so many houses?" Penny asked as she ate her toast with jam. Carol smiled tiredly. "Because that's how we pay for this house and your food and everything we need, sweetie. Some people have a lot of money and they pay people like me to help keep their homes nice." "Are the people nice?" "Most of them are," Carol said, though her voice suggested not all of them treated her with kindness. "Today I'm going to a very big house. The biggest one I've ever worked at. A man named Mr. Villa lives there with his little boy." Penny's eyes lit up. "He has a little boy? How old?" "Around your age, I think. 3 years old." "But Penny, listen to me carefully." Carol knelt down to look her daughter in the eyes. "I need to bring you with me today because Mrs. Henderson next door is sick and can't watch you. But you must be on your absolute best behavior. This is a very important job for Mama. The Villa family is very wealthy and very private. You need to stay quiet and not touch anything. Can you promise me?" Penny nodded seriously. "I promise, Mama. I'll be so quiet they won't even know I'm there." Carol hoped that was true, though she knew her daughter's curiosity had a way of getting the better of her promises. She gathered her cleaning supplies, took Penny's hand, and they walked to the bus stop together. The bus ride took 40 minutes, passing from their neighborhood of small houses and corner stores to areas where the homes got bigger and bigger. Penny pressed her nose against the window, watching the world change. The houses became mansions. The yards became estates. Trees lined perfect streets, and expensive cars sat in circular driveways. When they finally reached the Villa estate, Penny gasped. The iron gates alone were taller than any building she had ever seen. Through them, she could glimpse a house that looked like something from a fairy tale, all white stone and huge windows that reflected the sky. "Mama, do kings live here?" Carol smiled despite her nervousness. "No, sweetie. Just a very rich man and his son. Remember what I said, best behavior." A security guard checked Carol's identification at the gate and let them through. They walked up the long driveway, and with each step, Penny's eyes grew wider. The gardens on either side were like nothing she had imagined. Flowers in every color bloomed in perfect arrangements. Fountains bubbled with crystal clear water. Stone paths wound between bushes trimmed into the shapes of animals. Margaret met them at the side entrance, the one used by staff. She looked surprised to see the child. "Mrs. Martinez, I wasn't aware you'd be bringing your daughter today." Carol's face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Margaret. My regular sitter is ill and I had no one else to watch her. I promise she won't be any trouble. She'll stay with me the whole time and won't touch anything." Margaret studied Penny, who stood holding her mother's hand, trying to look as small and good as possible. Margaret's expression softened. She thought of Ethan, alone in his therapy room as always, unreachable in his silent world. "It's all right," Margaret said finally, "but she must stay with you at all times. The East Wing is off limits. That's where Mr. Villa's son receives his treatments. Mr. Villa values his privacy, especially regarding his son. Of course. Thank you so much for understanding." Carol was assigned to clean the main living areas, the grand rooms where Mr. Villa entertained business associates on the rare occasions he had visitors anymore. Penny followed her mother from room to room, her eyes wide as she took in the marble floors, the chandeliers that sparkled like captured stars, the paintings in gold frames, the furniture that looked too fancy to ever actually sit on. But what caught Penny's attention most was the garden she could see through the enormous windows. While her mother vacuumed and dusted, Penny stared outside at the most beautiful garden she had ever seen. There were flowers, yes, but also vegetables growing in neat rows, and a section that looked wild and natural, with tall grass and wildflowers and what appeared to be a small pond. "Mama, can I go look at the garden?" Penny whispered. "I promise I won't pick anything. I just want to see." Carol hesitated, then nodded. "Stay where I can see you through the window. Don't go far and don't touch anything. Come right back if I call you." Penny promised and slipped out through the garden door that Carol had opened to let in fresh air. The moment her feet touched the stone path outside, Penny felt like she had entered a different world. The air smelled like roses and fresh-cut grass. Bees hummed between flowers. A butterfly landed on her arm, its wings orange and black, and Penny held perfectly still, hardly breathing, until it flew away. She followed the path away from the fancy part of the garden toward the wild section that had caught her eye. Here the grass grew tall and free. Wildflowers swayed in the breeze. And there, near the edge of the pond, Penny found the most wonderful mud she had ever seen, rich and dark and perfect for making things. She knew she had promised not to touch anything, but this was just mud. It wasn't fancy furniture or expensive decorations. It was earth, and earth was meant to be played with. Penny looked back toward the house. She could still see her mother through the window, dusting a table. She'd be quick. Penny knelt down and scooped up a handful of the cool, smooth mud. It felt wonderful between her fingers, not too wet and not too dry. Perfect. She began to shape it, making small figures the way she did at home. A bird, a flower, a little turtle. She was so focused on her creations that she didn't notice she was no longer alone. Unknown to Penny, there was a door from Ethan's therapy room that led directly to this wild section of the garden. Margaret had insisted on it, believing fresh air might help the boy even if nothing else did. Today, after Dr. Muller's failed session, Margaret had wheeled Ethan's specialized chair outside, hoping the sunshine might bring some change to his blank expression. Ethan sat in his chair at the edge of the wild garden, his eyes staring at nothing, his hands still in his lap. Margaret had gone inside to prepare his lunch, planning to return in 10 minutes. She did this every day, these brief moments of garden time, though Ethan never showed any sign of knowing he was outside instead of inside. But something was different today. For the first time in his 3 years of life, Ethan tilted his head slightly to one side. His nose twitched almost imperceptibly. On the breeze, carried from just a few yards away, was a smell he had never encountered before, the rich, earthy scent of fresh mud mixed with crushed grass and wildflower stems. Penny, completely unaware she was being watched by a blind child, continued making her mud creations. She hummed a little song her mother sang to her, a tune without words, just happy sounds. She took a wildflower that had already fallen on the ground and pressed it into one of her mud sculptures, making a decoration. Ethan's head turned a fraction more toward the sound. The humming. It wasn't like the clinical voices of doctors or the careful whispers of servants. It was free and unself-conscious, the sound of pure joy. And that smell, earth and growing things and something wild and real. For the first time since he was born, something in the outside world had reached through Ethan's walls. Just a crack. Just a tiny opening. But it was there. Penny, still humming, picked up her favorite creation, a mud bird with a flower petal for a wing, and stood up to carry it closer to the pond to wash her hands. As she walked, she passed within 3 feet of Ethan's chair. She froze when she saw him. "Oh," she gasped, not in fear but in surprise. "Hello. I didn't see you there." Ethan, of course, said nothing. Did nothing. His honey-colored eyes stared in her direction but did not see her. Penny tilted her head, studying him with the unfiltered curiosity only children possess. "Are you Mr. Villa's little boy? My mama is cleaning the house. I'm Penny. I'm 4 years old. How old are you?" Silence. Penny didn't find this odd. She sometimes played with the neighbor's cat who also never answered her questions. She stepped closer, noticing his eyes didn't follow her movement. "Can't you see me?" she asked softly. Then, with the instant acceptance of a child, "That's okay. My grandpa couldn't see very well either. He said I had to talk extra so he could know what was happening." She looked down at the mud bird still in her hand, then at Ethan's clean, empty hands resting in his lap. "Have you ever played with mud? It's the best thing ever. You can make anything you want. Look, I made a bird." She held it up, forgetting he couldn't see it. Then she did something no doctor, no therapist, no specialist in 3 years had thought to do. She took Ethan's hand. His skin was soft and warm. His fingers were limp and unresponsive. But Penny didn't care. Gently, carefully, she pressed the small mud bird into his palm and closed his fingers around it. "There. Now you can feel what I made. It's a bird. Can you feel the wings? I put a flower petal right here. Birds need pretty things too, don't you think?" For 3 full seconds nothing happened. Then, so slowly that Penny almost didn't notice it at first, Ethan's fingers tightened just slightly around the mud sculpture. Just a fraction. Just enough to feel it better. Penny's face broke into the biggest smile. "You can feel it. Do you like it? Should I make you another one? I could make you a whole family of mud animals." And before anyone could stop her, before Margaret could return, before Carol could call her inside, before the walls of silence and isolation could slam shut again, Penny sat down right there in the grass next to Ethan's chair and began creating a menagerie of mud creatures, describing each one in her cheerful, unschooled voice as she worked. "This one is a turtle because turtles are slow and patient, just like my mama says I should be, but I'm not very good at it. And this one is a butterfly. I saw the most beautiful butterfly today, orange and black, and it sat right on my arm like I was a flower." Inside the mansion, Robert Villa stood in his office, staring at business reports he couldn't focus on. Margaret walked past the window and stopped suddenly, her hand flying to her mouth. Outside, in the wild garden where Ethan sat every day showing no response to anything, there was a little girl with muddy hands and tangled hair, and she was talking to him. And Ethan's head was turned toward her voice. His fingers were still holding the mud bird she had given him. And on his face, for the first time in 3 years, there was something that wasn't quite an expression but was definitely a change. A tiny relaxation of the permanent blankness that had always been there. Margaret's heart began to pound. She wanted to rush outside to see if she was really seeing what she thought she was seeing. But something stopped her. Some instinct told her not to break whatever was happening in that moment. Instead, she went to find Robert Villa, walking quickly but not running, her mind racing with possibility and hope and the certain knowledge that something impossible had just begun. In the wild garden, Penny finished her turtle and held it up. "There. Now you have 3 friends. A bird, a butterfly, and a turtle. They can keep you company. Do you want to feel this one too?" She reached for Ethan's other hand, and this time, when she touched him, his fingers didn't just accept her touch. They reached back. Just a little. Just barely. But they reached. And somewhere in the darkness where Ethan lived, a tiny crack of light appeared, carried on the smell of mud and the sound of a little girl's voice, offering friendship with dirty hands and a heart that didn't know the meaning of impossible. The door to Ethan's world, locked tight for 3 years, had just begun to open. But what would happen when the adults discovered what was happening? Would they stop it? Would they understand? And what exactly was it about this poor little girl that had reached Ethan when 27 experts could not? Margaret burst through the office doors without knocking, something she had never done in all her years working for the Villa family. Her cheeks were flushed, and her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the doorframe. "Mr. Villa, you need to come with me right now. Please." Robert looked up from his desk, irritation flashing across his tired face. "Margaret, I asked not to be disturbed. If another specialist has called claiming they can help, I don't want to hear about it. I'm done with false hope. It's not a specialist, sir. It's your son. Something is happening." The tone in her voice made Robert stand immediately. In 3 years he had learned to read Margaret's emotions like a book. She wasn't upset. She wasn't worried. She was excited, and that scared him more than anything because he didn't know if he could survive another disappointment. "What do you mean something is happening?" "Just come. Quickly." But quietly. Margaret pressed a finger to her lips. "We mustn't disturb them." Robert followed her through the hallways, his heart hammering against his ribs. They moved through the mansion toward the east wing, but instead of going to Ethan's therapy room, Margaret led him to a small viewing alcove that overlooked the wild garden. The window was partially hidden by curtains, allowing them to see outside without being easily noticed. "There," Margaret whispered, pointing. Robert looked out at the garden and felt his breath catch in his throat. Ethan was in his chair as usual, positioned in the shade of a large oak tree. But he wasn't alone. A small girl with wild brown curls sat cross-legged on the ground beside him, her hands covered in mud. She was talking animatedly, holding up small mud sculptures, and Robert's heart nearly stopped. Ethan was holding something. His fingers were wrapped around a small object, and his head was turned toward the girl's voice. "Who is that child?" Robert demanded, his voice low but intense. "Why is she near my son?" "You know the rules. No unauthorized people near Ethan, especially not children who could be carrying germs or—" "That's Carol Martinez's daughter," Margaret interrupted gently. "Carol is one of our housekeepers. She had to bring the girl today because her regular sitter was ill. I gave permission, but I specifically told them to stay away from this area. The child must have wandered off. Then get her away from Ethan immediately." Robert started toward the door, but Margaret's hand on his arm stopped him. "Mr. Villa, please. Look at your son. Really look at him." Robert turned back to the window, forcing himself to truly observe. Ethan's posture was different. Usually, his body was rigid, tense with the permanent stress of a child disconnected from the world. But now, there was a slight relaxation in his shoulders. His head moved fractionally, following the sound of the girl's voice. And his fingers, those fingers that had never voluntarily grasped anything in 3 years, were holding onto the mud sculpture she had given him. "She gave him that," Margaret said softly. "I watched through the therapy room window. She walked up to him, took his hand without any fear or hesitation, and placed that mud bird in his palm. And he held it, Mr. Villa. He chose to hold it." Robert's throat tightened. It could be a reflex. A coincidence. "Watch." In the garden, Penny had finished creating a small mud turtle. She held it up, turning it in the sunlight. "See how the shell is all bumpy? That's how real turtle shells feel. My teacher at daycare has a picture book about turtles, and it says they can live for 100 years. Can you imagine being that old?" She giggled at the thought. "Now, let me put this one in your other hand, okay?" She reached for Ethan's left hand, which was resting on the arm of his chair. The moment her small, muddy fingers touched his skin, Ethan's hand turned over, palm up, opening to receive what she was offering. Robert felt tears spring to his eyes. That wasn't a reflex. No, sir. It wasn't. They watched in silence as Penny continued her one-sided conversation, completely unbothered by Ethan's lack of verbal response. She talked about the flowers in the garden, about the clouds that looked like animals, about her mother's work in their small house and the cat next door who only had 3 legs but could still jump really high. "She's treating him like he's normal," Robert whispered. "Like there's nothing wrong with him." "Maybe that's exactly what he needs," Margaret replied. "Every person who has approached Ethan in 3 years has treated him like a patient, a problem to be solved, a case to be studied. But this little girl, she's treating him like a friend." As they watched, something even more remarkable happened. Penny picked a dandelion that had gone to seed, one of those white, fluffy ones that children love to blow on. She held it close to Ethan's face. "These are wish flowers," she explained seriously. "You're supposed to blow on them and make a wish, and the seeds carry your wish up to the sky. Want to try? I'll hold it close and you just blow. Like this," she demonstrated with a gentle puff of air. She held the dandelion near Ethan's lips. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, so faintly that Robert almost missed it, Ethan's lips parted slightly, and a small breath escaped. It wasn't a strong blow. The dandelion barely moved. Only 3 seeds drifted away. But it was intentional. It was a response. It was Ethan choosing to participate in the world. "Dear God," Robert breathed. "He did it. He actually did it." Penny clapped her hands together, delighted. "You did it. 3 wishes. That's even better than 1 wish because now you have 3 chances for good things to happen." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper as if sharing a secret. I always wish for my mama to not be so tired. What did you wish for? Of course Ethan didn't answer. But Penny didn't seem to expect him to. She simply picked another dandelion and held it out. Let's try again. Maybe you can blow more seeds this time. Robert turned away from the window, his hand covering his mouth. His whole body was shaking. 3 years. 3 years of the best doctors, the most expensive equipment, the most advanced therapies. And a poor little girl with muddy hands had accomplished in 15 minutes what none of them could do in 3 years. What do I do? He asked Margaret, his voice cracking. Do I go out there? Do I stop this? What if she leaves and he shuts down again? What if? Mr. Villa, take a breath, Margaret said calmly, though her own eyes were wet with tears. Let's not overwhelm him. Or her. Let's just watch for now. See what happens. They continued watching through the window. Penny had moved on from dandelions and was now trying to teach Ethan how to pat mud into different shapes. She took his hand, still holding the mud bird, and guided it to a pile of fresh mud on the ground. Feel how cool and squishy it is? It's like chocolate pudding but not for eating. You can make anything you want with it. Here, I'll help you. She began shaping his fingers around the mud, moving them gently, showing him through touch what words couldn't explain. And Ethan, impossibly, miraculously, allowed it. His hand didn't pull away. His body didn't stiffen. He was accepting her guidance, accepting her presence in his dark, silent world. Inside the house, Carol had finished dusting the main living room and was looking for her daughter. She had been checking periodically through the window, seeing Penny in the garden, but now she couldn't spot her anymore. Penny? She called, stepping outside. Penny, where are you? We need to stay together, remember? Her voice carried across the garden, and Penny looked up, startled. I'm over here, Mama. I made a new friend. Carol followed the voice and felt her blood run cold when she saw the scene. Her daughter was sitting in the mud next to a small boy in a specialized wheelchair, both of them covered in dirt, and, oh no, Penny was holding the boy's hands. Penny, get away from there right now. Carol rushed forward, mortified. This was the Villa boy, the one she'd been specifically told to keep Penny away from. She was going to lose this job. They were going to be kicked out of the estate, and word would spread that she couldn't control her child, and she'd never work for another wealthy family again. I'm so sorry, Carol gasped as she reached them. She tried to pull Penny away, but the little girl resisted. But Mama, we're playing. Look at the bird I made him. And the turtle. And he blew the dandelion seeds, Mama. He made 3 wishes. Penny, this is Mr. Villa's son. You can't just, we have to. Carol looked desperately toward the house, expecting security guards to come running. Instead, she saw Robert Villa walking toward them. Not running. Not angry. Just walking slowly, his face unreadable. Carol's heart sank. This was it. The end of the best-paying job she'd ever had. Mr. Villa, I am so deeply sorry, she began, her voice shaking. I told Penny to stay close to me. I didn't know she had wandered to this part of the garden. She didn't mean any harm, and I promise. Robert held up a hand to stop her. He wasn't looking at Carol. He was looking at Ethan, who was still holding the mud bird, his face turned toward the sound of the adult voices. What's your daughter's name? Robert asked quietly. Penny, sir. She's 4 years old. She's usually very well behaved, but she's curious and she loves nature and... Penny, Robert interrupted, looking at the little girl for the first time. That's a nice name. Penny beamed at him, completely unafraid. Thank you. Are you Ethan's daddy? He's really nice. We've been making mud animals together. Do you want to see? Robert's composure cracked. His eyes filled with tears that he couldn't stop. His name is Ethan. You learned his name? Mrs. Margaret told my mama earlier, Penny explained. I always like to know my friends' names. Your friends? Robert repeated softly. He knelt down slowly, bringing himself to Penny's level. Penny, do you know that Ethan can't see you? Do you know that he doesn't talk? Penny nodded seriously. Yes, sir. But that's okay. My grandpa couldn't see good either, and my mama's friend has a baby who doesn't talk yet, but they're still nice. Ethan listens really good. He held my bird really careful, see? She pointed to the mud sculpture still in Ethan's hand. And he blowed the dandelion seeds to make wishes. He just does things different, that's all. Robert felt something break open inside his chest, something that had been locked tight for 3 years. This child, this poor little girl with holes in her shoes and dirt under her fingernails, understood something that 27 specialists had missed. Ethan didn't need to be fixed. He needed to be accepted. He needed someone to meet him where he was, not where everyone thought he should be. Penny, Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. Would you like to come back tomorrow? To play with Ethan again? Carol gasped. Mr. Villa, you don't have to. Please, Robert interrupted, looking at Carol now. I'm not being polite. I'm begging you. Whatever you saw happen here today, it's more than any doctor has achieved in 3 years. If your daughter is willing to spend time with my son, I would be. His voice broke. I would be forever grateful. Penny bounced on her toes, excited. Can I, Mama? Can I come play with Ethan tomorrow? I want to show him the mud frogs I know how to make. And maybe we can find pretty leaves. Penny, slow down, Carol said, but she was looking at Robert with wonder and confusion. Mr. Villa, are you certain? I don't want to presume. I'll pay you, Robert said quickly. Whatever your hourly rate is, I'll triple it, quadruple it. I'll pay you to bring Penny here every day if necessary. Oh. Mr. Villa, Carol said gently, placing a hand on his arm. You don't need to pay me extra. If spending time with your son makes Penny happy and helps him somehow, then we'll come. Not for money. Because it's the right thing to do. Robert looked at this woman, this housekeeper who worked 3 jobs to support her daughter, who had so little compared to him, yet who had just refused additional money because kindness shouldn't have a price tag, and felt ashamed of all the years he had believed wealth could solve every problem. Thank you, he whispered. You have no idea what this means. Margaret had joined them now, and she was smiling through tears. Perhaps we should let the children say goodbye for today. It's almost Ethan's lunchtime and we don't want to overwhelm him. Penny knelt down next to Ethan one more time. I have to go now, but I'll come back tomorrow, okay? And we can make more mud things. And I'll bring my favorite smooth rock to show you. You can feel how nice it is. See you tomorrow, Ethan. She did something then that made every adult present hold their breath. She leaned forward and gave Ethan a gentle hug, wrapping her small arms around him for just a moment before pulling back. For 3 full seconds after she stepped away, Ethan remained absolutely still. Then, so slowly that it seemed like time had slowed down, his right hand, the one holding the mud bird, lifted slightly from the armrest of his chair. Just an inch. Just barely. But it was unmistakable. He was reaching toward where Penny had been. Robert made a sound between a sob and a laugh. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Carol's eyes went wide. He reached for her, Robert breathed. He reached for her. Penny, oblivious to the magnitude of what had just happened, waved cheerfully. Bye, Ethan. Bye, Mr. Villa. Bye, Mrs. Margaret. As Carol led Penny back toward the house to gather their things, the little girl chattered happily about her new friend and all the games they would play tomorrow. She had no idea that she had just performed a miracle. She had no idea that she had given a desperate father his first real hope in 3 years. She had no idea that the simple act of treating a lonely little boy like a person instead of a problem had begun to crack open a prison of silence and darkness. Robert stood in the garden long after they had gone, watching Margaret gently wheel Ethan back inside. His son was still holding the mud bird, his fingers pressed carefully around it, protecting it like treasure. That night, Robert sat in Ethan's room as his son slept. The mud bird sat on the nightstand. Margaret had offered to clean it away, but Robert had refused. It was the first thing Ethan had ever voluntarily held. It would stay exactly where it was. In the soft glow of the nightlight, Robert studied his son's sleeping face. Ethan looked peaceful in a way he never had before. The constant tension that usually creased his forehead even in sleep was gone. His breathing was calm and even. I don't know what that little girl did today, Robert whispered into the darkness. I don't know how she reached you when no one else could. But I promise you, Ethan. I promise I'll give her every chance to help you find your way back to us. Whatever it takes. Whatever she needs. He reached out and gently touched Ethan's hand, the hand that had reached for Penny. The hand that had held onto her gift. The hand that had, for the first time, reached toward another human being. In a small house 3 miles away, Penny was also getting ready for bed. She was still talking about Ethan as her mother helped her into her pajamas. Mama, do you think Ethan liked the bird I made him? Do you think he'll keep it? Tomorrow I'm going to make him a whole zoo. With elephants and giraffes and maybe even a dinosaur if I can figure out how. Carol smiled, brushing her daughter's wild hair. I think Ethan was very lucky to meet you today, sweet pea. I was lucky too, Penny said seriously. It's hard to find friends who like mud as much as I do. As Carol tucked her daughter into bed, she thought about the look on Robert Villa's face, that mixture of desperate hope and overwhelming gratitude. She thought about the little boy who couldn't see or speak but who had responded to her daughter in ways that apparently no one else had achieved. She didn't understand it. She didn't need to. Sometimes miracles didn't come with explanations. Sometimes they just came with muddy hands and an open heart. In the darkness of her small bedroom, Penny hugged her stuffed rabbit and smiled. She had made a new friend today. A friend who was quiet and couldn't see, but who had held her bird so carefully and who had tried so hard to blow the dandelion seeds. She couldn't wait to play with him again tomorrow. Neither child knew what was beginning. Neither child understood that their friendship would challenge everything the adult world believed about connection, communication, and what it meant to truly see another person. But in two houses separated by wealth and distance yet connected by an impossible bond, two children slept peacefully, and their parents lay awake in wonder. The journey had only just begun. And tomorrow, when a little girl with muddy hands returned to a mansion filled with silence, the next chapter of the impossible would unfold. What would happen when Penny came back? Would Ethan continue to respond? Or would this brief breakthrough disappear like morning fog? And what exactly was happening in the darkness behind Ethan's unseeing eyes? What was changing? What was waking up? What was finally finding a reason to reach toward the light? The answers would come. But first, the sun had to rise on a new day. A day that would bring discoveries, challenges, and moments that would shake Robert Villa's understanding of everything he thought he knew about his son. Chapter 3. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when Robert Villa was already awake. He hadn't truly slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ethan's hand reaching toward Penny, saw his son holding that mud bird like it was made of gold instead of dirt. Part of him was terrified that yesterday had been a dream or worse, a fluke that would never happen again. He went to Ethan's room before dawn. Margaret was already there, having stayed overnight as she sometimes did when Robert was particularly worried about his son. She was sitting in the chair beside Ethan's bed, and in her hands was the mud bird. "It dried overnight," she said softly, noticing Robert in the doorway. "It's hardened. I thought about preserving it somehow, sealing it so it won't crumble." Robert walked over and took the sculpture carefully. It was crude, simple, exactly what you'd expect from a 4-year-old child. The bird's body was lumpy, one wing larger than the other, the flower petal pressed into it now brown and wilted. It was imperfect and beautiful and the most precious thing Robert had ever held besides his son. "He slept with his hands stretched out toward the nightstand," Margaret continued, "toward where the bird was sitting. Like he knew it was there. Like he wanted to be close to it." Robert's throat tightened. What if yesterday was all we get? What if she comes back today and he doesn't respond anymore? "Then we'll deal with that if it happens," Margaret said firmly. "But Mr. Villa, I've worked with children for 30 years. What I saw yesterday wasn't a coincidence or a random reaction. That little girl connected with your son in a way that was real. Whatever door she opened, I don't believe it will slam shut so easily." Ethan stirred in his bed and both adults fell silent. The little boy's eyes opened, those beautiful honey-colored eyes that saw nothing. He lay still for a moment as he always did. But then something different happened. His hand moved across the blanket, searching, his fingers opening and closing as if looking for something specific. "The bird?" Robert breathed. "He's looking for the bird." Margaret quickly placed it in Ethan's searching hand. The moment his fingers touched the dried mud, his hand closed around it and pulled it close to his chest. A sound escaped his lips, not a word, but a small exhale that might have been contentment or relief. Robert sank into the chair, his heart pounding. He remembers. He knows it's his. He was looking for it. "Yes," Margaret whispered, her own eyes wet. He was. 3 miles away, Penny had also woken up early, too excited to sleep. She burst into her mother's bedroom while it was still dark outside. "Mama, is it time to go see Ethan yet?" Carol groaned and checked her phone. "Penny, it's 5:30 in the morning. We're not going anywhere for at least 3 more hours." 3 hours? Penny collapsed dramatically on the floor. "That's like 100 years. Despite her exhaustion, Carol smiled. She hadn't seen her daughter this excited about anything in a long time. "Why don't you go get dressed and eat your breakfast? Time will go faster if you're doing things." Penny scrambled up and ran to her room. Carol could hear her singing to herself as she got ready, making up songs about mud birds and quiet friends and gardens with wishes floating in the air. Carol got up and made coffee, thinking about the day ahead. Mr. Villa had sent her a text message late last night, confirming that she should bring Penny today and that she should feel free to let Penny spend as much time with Ethan as the children wanted. He'd also mentioned that he'd arranged for them to have access to the full garden, not just the wild section, and that Margaret would provide lunch for Penny if they stayed through the afternoon. It was all so surreal. 24 hours ago, Carol had been terrified of losing her job because Penny had wandered off. Now she was being asked, begged really, to bring her daughter to play with a billionaire's son. "Mama, I need to bring things for Ethan." Penny called from her room. "Can I bring my smooth rocks? And the pretty feather I found? And maybe some of my books?" "We'll see, Sweet Pea. Let's start with just you and see what happens today." But when it was time to leave, Carol couldn't say no to her daughter's eager face. They packed a small bag with some of Penny's treasures: smooth river stones she'd collected, a bright blue feather from a jay, a picture book about animals that was worn from being read 1,000 times, and a small bag of special clay Penny's teacher had given her from the art room. The bus ride seemed to take forever in Penny's mind. She pressed her face against the window, watching the world pass by, counting down the stops until they reached the fancy neighborhood where Ethan lived. When they finally arrived at the villa estate, Robert himself was waiting at the gate. He looked tired, Carol noticed, like he hadn't slept. But his eyes were bright with something that looked like desperate hope. "Good morning," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for bringing her." "We're happy to be here," Carol replied, though she still felt awkward about the whole situation. She was used to being invisible in the homes where she worked, someone who cleaned and left without being noticed. This attention from her employer was strange and unsettling. Penny, however, had no such discomfort. She bounced on her toes, her bag of treasures swinging from her shoulder. "Hi, Mr. Villa. Can I go see Ethan now? I brought him presents. Well, not really presents like from a store, but things I found that are special. Do you think he'll like them?" Robert knelt down to Penny's level, and Carol was startled to see tears in his eyes. "I think he'll love them, Penny. He's been waiting for you." "He has." Penny's face lit up. "How do you know?" "Because he held the bird you made him all night. And this morning he was looking for it when he woke up." Penny's eyes went wide. "Really? He kept it? He really kept it?" She turned to her mother. "Mama, did you hear? He kept the bird." "I heard, Sweet Pea. That's wonderful." Margaret appeared at the entrance, smiling warmly. "Good morning, Penny. Ethan is in the garden already. He's been outside since breakfast, and I think he's been waiting for you." Penny needed no further invitation. She took off running toward the garden, her bag bouncing against her hip, her shoes slapping against the stone path. The adults followed more slowly, Carol feeling increasingly out of place and Robert looking like he was barely holding himself together. In the wild section of the garden, Ethan sat in his chair in the same spot as yesterday. The morning sun filtered through the oak tree leaves, creating dancing patterns of light and shadow. The mud bird rested in his lap, his hands curved protectively around it. "Ethan." Penny's voice rang out across the garden. "I'm here. I came back just like I promised." Ethan's head turned toward her voice. His fingers tightened slightly on the bird. His lips parted, though no sound came out. Penny ran up to him and stopped, noticing immediately that he was holding her creation. "You still have the bird. You didn't let anyone take it away." She sounded so proud, so delighted. "That makes me really happy. I thought maybe it got lost or broken or something." She dropped her bag on the ground and knelt beside his chair, exactly as she had yesterday, completely comfortable and unafraid. "I brought you other things too. Want to feel them?" Without waiting for an answer she knew wouldn't come, Penny reached into her bag and pulled out one of her smooth river stones. It was oval-shaped, gray with white stripes, worn perfectly smooth by years of water flowing over it. "This is my favorite stone. I found it by the creek near my house. See how smooth it is." She took Ethan's hand, the one not holding the bird, and placed the stone in his palm. "Run your fingers over it. It's like touching a baby bird's egg, all smooth and perfect." The adults watched from a distance. Robert stood frozen, barely breathing as Ethan's fingers slowly moved across the surface of the stone. Back and forth, feeling the smoothness, exploring the texture. "He's doing it," Robert whispered. "He's responding again." It wasn't a fluke. Penny was already pulling out another treasure. "And this is a feather from a blue jay. They're these really pretty birds that are blue and white and black, and they make loud noises like they're yelling at everyone." She giggled. "My mama says they have attitudes. Feel how soft it is." She brushed the feather across the back of Ethan's hand, and he actually flinched. A small movement, but a movement nonetheless. A response to sensation. To touch. "It tickles, doesn't it?" Penny said knowingly. "I like to brush it on my cheek. So soft." "Here, I'll put it right here." She tucked the feather into his shirt pocket carefully. "Now you can keep it close and touch it whenever you want." For the next hour, Penny introduced Ethan to her collection of treasures. She gave him a pine cone and helped his fingers explore the patterns of the scales. She gave him a piece of tree bark and described the designs in it, tracing the patterns with his fingers. She gave him a handful of acorns and showed him how to shake them to hear the rattling sound inside. And with each item, Ethan responded a little more. His fingers became more exploratory, less passive. His head turned toward her voice more quickly. His breathing changed when she spoke, becoming less steady and mechanical, more natural and varied. The breathing of someone actually listening, actually paying attention. But the most remarkable moment came when Penny pulled out her small bag of modeling clay. "This is special clay from my teacher," she explained. "It doesn't dry out like regular clay, so you can squish it and make things over and over again. Want to try making something together?" She pulled off a piece of the clay and pressed it into Ethan's hand. Then she took his other hand and began gently guiding his fingers, showing him how to squeeze and shape the material. "Feel how it squishes between your fingers? You can make it into any shape you want. Here, let's make a ball first. Just squeeze it all together. Yeah, like that." Robert watched his son's fingers move, guided by Penny's small hands. He watched Ethan's face, which showed more expression in these moments than it had in 3 years. The little boy's forehead creased slightly in concentration. His lips pressed together in what might have been effort. "He's trying," Robert said, his voice breaking. "Margaret, look at him. He's actually trying." Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. "She's teaching him. She's showing him how to interact with the world through touch." Carol stood slightly apart from them, watching her daughter work with the little boy. She had never seen Penny so patient, so focused. Usually, her daughter bounced from activity to activity like a butterfly. But here with Ethan, she moved slowly and deliberately, giving him time to process each sensation, never rushing, never showing frustration when his responses were delayed or minimal. After they had worked with the clay for a while, Penny had an idea. "Ethan, want to feel something really cool? Come on, let's go to the muddy spot. I'll show you something amazing." She stood up and looked expectantly at Margaret. "Can he come out of his chair? Can he sit on the ground with me?" Margaret looked at Robert, who nodded immediately. Yes, he can sit on the ground." Together, Margaret and Robert carefully lifted Ethan from his specialized chair and lowered him to the grass near the mud patch. His legs folded awkwardly, he had so little practice using them, but he didn't resist. If anything, his body seemed more relaxed on the ground than it ever was in his chair. Penny settled beside him, sitting cross-legged in her worn shorts that were already dirty from yesterday's play. "Okay, now this is the best part. We're going to put our hands right in the mud. Not to make anything, just to feel it. It's squishy and cool and it feels like the earth is giving you a hug. Ready?" She took Ethan's hand and slowly, gently, pressed it down into the soft mud. His fingers sank into the cool, wet earth and for a moment he went very still. Then, something incredible happened. Ethan's fingers flexed, digging slightly deeper into the mud. He made a sound, a small exhalation that carried the faintest hint of voice. Not a word. Not even close to a word. But it was intentional. It was communication. It was Ethan saying, in the only way he could, that he felt something. That something had reached him. "You like it?" Penny exclaimed, clapping her hands together, not caring that she was splattering mud everywhere. "I knew you would. Mud is the best. Now watch this." She scooped up a handful of mud and began squeezing it through her fingers, letting it ooze out between them. "It's like making mud spaghetti. Wanna try?" She helped guide his hands through the motion, and Ethan, slowly, tentatively, began to squeeze the mud. It squished between his fingers and his mouth opened slightly, that same small sound escaping again. Robert had to turn away, his hand over his mouth, his shoulders shaking. Carol noticed and moved closer to him instinctively. "Mr. Villa, are you all right?" He shook his head, unable to speak for a moment. When he finally found his voice, it was barely a whisper. "He's 3 years old and I've never heard him make a voluntary sound. Not once. Never anything that suggested he was experiencing something, feeling something, wanting to communicate something. But she, your daughter, she's pulling responses from him that I didn't think existed." Carol looked at her daughter, who was now showing Ethan how to pat the mud into flat pancakes, narrating everything she did in her cheerful, unself-conscious voice. "I don't understand how she's doing it. Penny's just being Penny." "Maybe that's exactly why it works," Margaret said quietly, joining them. "She has no expectations. She doesn't see him as broken or damaged or someone who needs to be fixed. She just sees a friend who experiences the world differently than she does." They watched as Penny pulled out her worn picture book. "Okay, now I'm going to read you my favorite story. It's about animals and I've read it like a million times so I know all the words by heart. But the best part is the pictures have different textures. See? She opened the book and took Ethan's hand, guiding it to the page. This is a bunny. Feel his fur? It's all soft and fuzzy. And this is a fish. Feel how smooth and scaly it is? And this is a porcupine. Don't worry, it's not really sharp, it just feels bumpy and hard. Page by page, she took him through the book, pressing his fingers to each textured illustration, describing the animals and the sounds they made and the places they lived. And Ethan's hand stayed engaged, his fingers exploring each texture she showed him, his head turning toward her voice as if it was a lifeline pulling him out of darkness. Time passed without anyone noticing. The sun climbed higher in the sky. Morning became afternoon. Margaret brought out lunch, sandwiches and fruit and cookies, and Penny helped Ethan hold a sandwich, guiding his hands to his mouth, celebrating like he'd won a championship when he took a bite on his own. You did it. You fed yourself. That's so great, Ethan. The simple act of eating, something every 3-year-old should do easily, became a victory worth celebrating. And in Penny's celebration, there was no pity, no sense that this was something sad or behind where he should be. There was only genuine happiness that her friend had accomplished something. As the afternoon wore on, Penny began to slow down. She was still talking, still engaging with Ethan, but her movements became gentler, quieter. She lay down in the grass beside him, both of them covered in mud, and looked up at the clouds. That one looks like a dragon, she said, pointing upward even though he couldn't see. And that one looks like an ice cream cone. What do you think they look like? Of course Ethan couldn't answer, couldn't see the clouds. But he lay there beside her, his hand still holding the smooth stone she'd given him, his body relaxed in a way it never was, and the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of connection and companionship and the simple peace of two children existing together in a moment. Robert watched them lying side by side in the grass, his son who had never had a friend, and the little girl who had decided without question that they were friends. And something in his heart that had been frozen for 3 years finally began to thaw. He walked over and sat down near them in the grass, not caring that his expensive pants would be ruined. Penny, can I ask you something? Penny rolled onto her side to look at him. Sure, Mr. Villa. Why do you think Ethan likes playing with you? Penny thought about this seriously, her face scrunched up in concentration. Well, I think maybe because I listen to him. But he doesn't talk, sweetheart. How can you listen to him? Not with words, Penny explained patiently, like she was teaching him something obvious. I listen to how he holds things, and how his face changes when he touches different stuff, and how his breathing sounds different when he likes something. That's all talking, just not with mouth words. My grandpa used to say that people talk in lots of ways, and you just gotta pay attention to the ways that aren't words. Robert felt tears slip down his cheeks. This 4-year-old child understood something profound that he, with all his education and resources, had completely missed. He had been so focused on getting Ethan to communicate in normal ways that he'd never stopped to learn the language his son was already speaking. You're very wise, Penny. She giggled. My mama says I'm trouble, but I think she means it in a good way. As the sun began to lower in the sky, Carol reluctantly said they needed to go. She had an evening shift at another house and needed to make sure Penny had dinner and got to bed at a reasonable time. Penny's face fell. But I don't want to leave Ethan yet. We were having such a good time. I know, sweetie, but you can come back tomorrow. Really? Promise? Carol looked at Robert, who nodded immediately. Yes, every day. As many days as you want. This is... Penny, what you're doing for Ethan is incredible. Please come back tomorrow. Penny brightened immediately. She turned to Ethan, who was still lying in the grass, still holding his smooth stone. Did you hear that? I get to come back tomorrow. And you know what? Tomorrow I'm going to bring different stuff to show you. And maybe we can make mud animals again. Would you like that? Ethan made no response that anyone else could see. But Penny seemed satisfied with whatever she perceived. He's excited, she announced confidently. I can tell. As they prepared to leave, Penny did something unexpected. She pulled the blue feather from Ethan's pocket and handed it to Robert. Can you put this under his pillow tonight? That way when he goes to sleep he can touch it and remember that I'm coming back. So he won't be sad that I left. Robert took the feather with shaking hands. That's very thoughtful, Penny. I'll make sure he has it. And the stone, make sure he keeps the stone. It's his now. I have others, but that one is special for him. Robert promised. Margaret and Robert helped Ethan back into his chair, and as they lifted him, he made that sound again. That small vocalization that wasn't quite a word but was definitely intentional. His hand clutched the stone, and his head turned toward where Penny's voice had last been. "See," Penny said to her mother as they walked toward the gate. "He's talking. Not everybody hears it, but he's definitely talking." After they left, Robert sat in the garden for a long time, holding the blue feather, watching the sun set over the estate. Margaret finally came out to get him for dinner. "She's coming back tomorrow?" she asked. "Yes. Tomorrow and every day after that, if she's willing." "What are you thinking, Mr. Villa?" Robert looked at the spot where Ethan and Penny had lain in the grass, the imprints of their small bodies still visible in the flattened grass and mud. "I'm thinking that I've been going about this all wrong. I've spent 3 years trying to bring Ethan into our world, the world of speech and sight and normal development. But Penny, she's meeting him in his world. She's learning his language instead of forcing him to learn ours." "That's very insightful," Margaret said gently. "It shouldn't have taken a 4-year-old to teach me that. I'm his father. I should have figured it out. You did the best you could with what you knew. Now you know better. And now Ethan has a chance he didn't have before." That night, Robert tucked Ethan into bed personally, something he'd been doing less and less as the weight of disappointment had grown heavier. He placed the blue feather under Ethan's pillow, just as Penny had instructed. He made sure the smooth stone was within reach on the nightstand, next to the dried mud bird. "She's coming back tomorrow," Robert whispered to his son. "Your friend is coming back. And we're going to learn from her, Ethan. We're going to learn how to hear you even when you're not using words." For the first time in 3 years, Robert felt something he'd thought was lost forever. He felt hope. And in a small house 3 miles away, Penny fell asleep with mud still under her fingernails and a smile on her face, dreaming of dragons and clouds and a quiet friend who talked with his hands and his breathing and his careful way of holding treasures made of mud and stone. Tomorrow would bring new discoveries. Tomorrow would bring challenges neither the children nor the adults could predict. But tonight, 2 families slept with hearts just a little bit lighter, connected by the impossible bridge a little girl had built with nothing but patience, mud, and the radical acceptance that sometimes the best way to help someone find their way to you is to first find your way to them. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel to support our growth. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the incredible conclusion of this story.